Hey there! Aleph, Bet, Gimel. I think that's as far as I get in Hebrew. And recently, um, Marlen from Italy launched a pen in collaboration with an Italian fountain pen forum. And it's called the Aleph, the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And um, I was very fascinated by that pen because it was marketed as having a flex nib. And on modern pens, flex nibs are not always very high performing, let's put it that way. So I was very fascinated by the pen. I contacted Marlen, and Marlen was kind enough to send me one of these pens. So Marlen, thanks a lot. I'm going to review the pen, and just for you people who are wondering about this, because I do get questions about it occasionally, the fact that I get a pen from a manufacturer does not magically make my objectivity disappear. So don't worry too much about this. This pen has received exactly the same treatment as any other pen I review. I've used it for multiple days. I have put it on different types of paper. I've used 2 different types of ink in it, and that's pretty much all there's to it. So don't be too scared that suddenly I will give this pen a mega positive review. In fact, I was quite skeptical, as I just said, because a lot of modern flex nibs I'm not too impressed with. Okay, so the pen. I'm going to cover the parts of the pen, tell you what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and then we'll do a writing sample. This is the box, and the box I think is very cool because it is 100% eco-friendly. I think it's very cool. Marlenpens.com, little band, very nice. And this box, which is a type of recycled cardboard or recycled paper feel to it. You can see it actually has some stuff in the paper. I think it's very nice packaging. You open up the box, and then you see the Aleph again. I think Hebrew is a beautiful alphabet. I can't read or write it, but I think it's really nice. You really have this beautiful innate line variation, which I think is very cool. Okay, you take off the Aleph bit, and then you have a little information brochure. Which you pull out, and then you have fountainpen.it forum. That's the forum that was the users gave the input to make this pen, if I understand correctly. And then you have this information brochure on Marlen, what they do, what types of pens they make, etc. And that is in Italian and in English. I think that's it. Also filling instructions. Okay, now on to the actual pen, held neatly in place in its little box. You have this little lip, you can pull that, and then the pen comes out, as well as this little thing that says Marlen. I think that's what they in stores put under the clip. Okay, the pen. Is there anything under the whole thing? No. And I've just torn the paper. In any case, the pen. I'm going to cover the parts of the pen. Let's start on top. On top of the pen is the Marlen logo on the finial, which is a sort of stylized nib. I like it. Then we have this cap. You see the marbling of the material, which is quite nice. And here we have the very reflective clip. Then on the back of the cap, it says that this is number, I think, 201 of the Aleph collection. I believe it was a limited edition, but I'm not entirely sure. Please don't quote me on that. And then you have 3 center bands. Then you have the barrel. The barrel, again, is that black with this sort of smoke gray marbling, which I think is very cool. It really is nice. It's not the deepest marbling I've ever seen, but it definitely has this nice sort of reflective quality that changes with the light. So I think that's very cool. The clip is nice. It's quite tight, but it's definitely usable. The cap unscrews, and you can pose the pen, and then it turns into a pretty big pen. And the whole thing is not exactly small, by the way. It's a pretty big pen. We have the section. You can see these threads. They go down to the section. And for me, it's always bonus points when the section is the same material as the barrel. And it is in this case. Then you have the nib, to which I'll come back in a second. But first, I would like to tell you about the section. The threads, these threads are a little bit sharp, but the section is big enough for me to hold comfortably. And because it flares out a bit at the end, it's a very pleasant section to hold, and for me also the right thickness, the right girth. Okay, a special nib. This nib has the Aleph. I think it's laser engraved on there, and I think below that it says Aleph. Oh no, sorry, below that it says Marlen. It's a little hard to see in my video feed here, guys, sorry. The nib is steel. It has a heart-shaped breather hole, and it has the side cutouts to give it flex. And one thing I really like is something you can sort of see here. The feed is see-through. It is transparent, which means you can see the ink in there. Right now a deep purple ink, it's Mont Blanc lavender, but as you can see, if you look through the breather hole, you can see through the feed, which for some reason turns me on immensely. Well, not really, but I do really like I do really like that you can see it, because it also gives you an idea of how well the feed is primed while you are writing, and especially because the nib flexes. I think that's a very, very cool feature. Okay, final thing I need to show you is the filling mechanism. The pen was marketed as being a piston filler, and it has an actual old-fashioned blind cap that you remove completely. Then you have that turning knob. Now, a lot of pens I've seen recently that are marketed as being piston fillers actually are pens with a built-in converter. Now you could say, well, a converter is a piston too, but of course, if you use a converter in the pen, that does not utilize the whole barrel as an ink reservoir, only the converter, which typically holds a bit less ink. I have disassembled this pen, I have removed the nib and feed, I have shown a bright flashlight inside, and to the best of my knowledge, this is an actual piston. So it is not a cartridge converter that's built in, it is actually a piston. So that's quite cool. Okay, now, having said all of this, I've shown you the pen. What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? There are a couple of things I really like about it. First of all, there is the looks of the pen. I think it looks cool. I like the size. It's definitely not a small pen. Here you have a Faber-Castell Emotion, not a small pen itself. Quite nice, but whoops. I think it's a very nice size, weight, and balance. When you hold this pen, it feels pretty well balanced. It's a little top heavy, but because of the material, it's not metal, it's really bearable and really doable. With the cap, for me, it becomes a bit too much. But that's a bit of personal preference, I'm sure. Of course, what you guys are really interested in is, what about the nib? Does it flex as advertised? Well, of course, I think it's easiest to show you that in the writing sample, but to give a straight answer to the question, this is a flex nib. It goes, in my tests, from fine to broad, and that's all there's to it. You don't even have to push down ridiculously hard to get that effect, and yet you don't have to, it's not so light that when you write normally you continuously go from fine to broad, so it's a nice mixture. The one thing I will say is that's something I don't like so much. The feed does seem to have some problems with keeping up with the ink flow. And when you flex a lot, and of course that's the fun of having a flex pen, you will find that you get quite some railroading. That also depends on the ink and on the paper you're using. Paper that sucks up the ink can infer railroading, because can cause railroading because it just sucks up the ink, it dries out the feed quickly. Very smooth paper, in my experience, also railroads, so you need to find something in between that, which is not always easy. So you will definitely get railroading. However, it is not railroading every letter. You can definitely write a few characters before you actually get the railroading, and it's mainly a problem for the really, really pushing the pen hard, ultra flex in the very broad range. So if you flex just a little bit for line variation, I don't think it's going to railroad a lot on you. Okay, I think I've told you everything I like about the pen, I don't like about the pen. Let's take a few measurements, and then we do the writing sample that I'm sure you're much more interested in than my inane blabbering. It's a 145 millimeters capped, which is definitely fairly big, I would say. Uncapped, it's 135 millimeters, which is also not that small. The section diameter at the narrowest point, right below that flare out, is 10 millimeters, and at the widest point it's 12 millimeters. So probably not a pen for those who have smaller hands or like a very thin pen. Okay, as to the weight, inked up, the pen weighs 30 grams. Nice round amount. I think I've told you everything I need to tell you, except that Marlen also gave me a bottle of ink. It's a pretty nice sepia ink, and I have tried it in the pen. It was nice, but now I have another ink in there. So Marlen, thanks for the ink, thanks for the pen. Guys, I think it's time we do a writing sample. That's what we're going to do next. I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you later. Bye bye. Okay, the Marlen Aleph. Look at the marbling. I'm going to use this unposted, and what we have here is the Marlen Aleph, and the ink is Mont Blanc lavender purple. So let's see what this can do. Just for the record, I am right now using this pen without any pressure. So if you don't use any pressure, this is the line you get, which I would say is a fine. That's a fine platinum desk pen. Now, if we are going to do some fast writing, boom, there we go. No skipping, no skidding. Now, as to wetness, right now the pen is doing quite a decent job. I would not call this a gusher. It's a nice pen, and it writes well. I wouldn't call it a gusher. It's not dry either, but it's not super wet. Now, when it comes to the flex, because I know that this is the moment you're all waiting for, so let's take some time for this. I'm going to just make strokes starting with no pressure and then applying more and more pressure. I have to slow down a bit to stop the railroading, because of course I'm flexing to the max here. This is as far as I'm willing to go. I think if I go beyond that I may do damage to the nib. You see there's a bit of railroading. I think that's almost inevitable at that speed, but this is no pressure, right? So I would say that this nib goes from a fine to a broad. And the fact that it railroads, yeah, it is what it is. Prime the feed well, and I think you can typically get away with some more flexing. Don't forget also that this is very smooth paper, which I think induces a bit of railroading as well. Either paper that is fairly coarse and sucks up the ink will induce railroading, and this will do that too. And notice how much ink this is, because this is Clairefontaine paper, and you can see feathering right there. So that's a lot of ink. Okay, now as to flex writing, because I mean this is really pushing the pen to the max. If I were to do some flex writing, and I know perfectly well that I am not an expert at that, you see that this is where the railroading is starting after a few letters, and then I would personally prime the feed and go at it again. I don't know how well you can see this. It's going to be tough. Look how awesome it is that you can look through the breather hole and actually see the clear feed, but because it's clear you can actually see the paper and ink. You know, I think that's pretty cool. That also gives you an idea of how well the feed is primed. And you see the ink down there, but you see a bit of lack of ink there. So this is what I mean when I say it does not really compare to vintage flex, because a vintage flex pen would keep up with something like this typically, and you see that this pen starts to railroad. However, that's also a bit of a property of the paper, a bit of a property of the ink, and it just means that you really need to prime your feed well, and then you can probably get away with quite a bit of flexing without having too terrible railroading. Whether this type of railroading is acceptable to you clearly is up to you. For me, considering the nice package of the whole pen, it is. But I can see some purists who would say, well, this is unacceptable, so it's not a good flex pen. Well, of course that's your reason, or your right to form your own opinion. I would say grazie mille again to Marlen for supplying me with this very nice pen. I am definitely enjoying using this pen. So Marlen, I'm enjoying it so much, I want to do more writing with it. Grazie mille. Guys, I hope this was useful. I hope this is a pen that you may want to check out. That's all there's to it. I'll gladly see you later. Bye bye.